Mr. Chairman, I appreciate the opportunity here. I am very concerned about the Air Force making irreversible decisions to shut down fighter squadrons, particularly in the Air National Guard. So this amendment calls for the Air Force to not shut down these squadrons for 180 days until they provide a plan how they're going to modernize their fighter squadrons, particularly in the Air National Guard. This is not about individual airframes, units, or states. It's about preserving America's tactical air power, starting with the Air National Guard. The fighter fleet in the Air Force has been reduced by 60% since 1987, and is on track to shrink another 397 aircraft by the end of the fiscal year 2029. In other words, we're going to shut down or remove 2.5 aircraft for every new aircraft we put in the force. This decline, combined with chronic under-resourcing with the Air Force, is getting critically too low for us to defend against China, Russia, and in the Middle East. I have to remind this conference that 20% of all funds going to the Air Force don't make it to the Air Force. It goes to primarily intelligence agencies. So the Air Force already gets a 20% cut and doesn't have an adequate budget to bring in a new aircraft for every aircraft it takes out. Now, the Air National Guard provides 30% of the Air Force combat power and responsible for 94% of the Homeland Defense missions. Most of the cuts that we're going to be doing to the Air Force is going to actually come out of the Air National Guard. Now, Gerald Van Herk from Northcom has made very clear in this committee that he has very serious concerns about defending U.S. airspace right now, and eliminating more fighter squadrons will not make the job easier for him. The most experienced pilots and maintainers in the Air Force are in our Air National Guard. When we cut these squadrons, you will not regain this capability. In fact, the Air National Guard pilots are nearly twice as experienced as the active duty counterparts. When we shut down an Air National Guard squadron, you will not get that capability back. So, Mr. Chairman, I urge support from this amendment because we need a strong United States Air Force to deter against China, Russia, and Iran. And I realize many of these fighters were taken out will be older ones that will not be the right ones for China, but they are the right ones for the Middle East, and they provide deterrence in Europe. And we cannot let our Air National Guard be cut to a size that we cannot grow back easily over the next decade or 2 decades. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield.
Is there any discussion or debate on the amendment? Chair recognizes the ranking member.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do oppose this amendment, and I understand where Mr. Bacon is coming from, and I think he has an incredibly thoughtful approach to this and understands the Guard. But this is part of sort of the larger debate about Congress restricting the ability of DOD, in this case the Air Force, discontinuing existing programs. And the focus here is how do we modernize, how do we innovate? And we've had this discussion on the committee before where DOD puts out plans, okay, we're getting rid of these systems and moving on. We invariably block them. We had this fight over the A-10 for years. We've had the fight over some cruisers that were past their useful life. We've had the fight over the B-1, the F-22. Every time the Air Force or DOD goes to discontinue an existing program, it impacts somebody and they don't want to see it happen. And those little pieces add up to a lot of money that then makes it difficult to have the money to modernize. I can't say for sure exactly what's going on with the F-16s and exactly how many need to be there, but this basically freezes in place our existing force structure until this study is done and until I believe it's 180 days now after the study is done before they can make a decision. And the thing that I really feel passionately about is the need to modernize and innovate our military. New technologies, and we're seeing that play out in the battlefield in Ukraine. The newer drone technologies, the newer targeting technologies, the newer missiles are vastly more effective than the old ones, as are newer planes. And the more we continue to spend money on old systems that are costly to operate and not as effective, the tougher it is to reach those modernization goals. Now, we're not going to get rid of everything because we're not instantly building all of these new, better equipment systems. I understand that. It's a balance to be struck. But I would say that in my experience on this committee and in Congress, the tendency of members is to protect their local interest regardless of that overall debate, whereby DOD is trying to engage in that overall debate and figure out what is the best system going forward. So I am rarely a fan of restricting the ability of the military to discontinue what they need to discontinue. And that's the main reason I want to speak in opposition to the amendment. And I yield back. Thank you.
A gentleman from Mississippi, General Kelly's recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would just like to speak in strong support of this amendment. And if we don't allow this, as co-chair of the Guard and Reserve Caucus, it's important that when we make these decisions, we don't make them on a compo 1, 2, or 3 decision. And I'm not confident that's where we are on this. If we're going to do that, let's do it across the board. But it's about readiness and operational capabilities. And our Guard and Reserve over the last 22 years have proven that we are no longer a strategic reserve, but an operational reserve. And with that, I yield the balance of my time to Mr. Bacon.
Thank you. Appreciate getting your yield time back. I just want to make clear, just in response to one comment to the ranking member, there is no parochial interest for me in this. I did not fly fighters. I flew heavy aircraft.
Gentleman yield first and say, I apologize. I know that. Okay, I'm not talking about you. I'm not talking about this instance. That's why I said at the outset, your knowledge of the Guard, I don't question that. So I apologize on that. That
Thank you.
was not directed at you.
I just also want to point out we have no fighter aircraft in Nebraska. We have tankers. We have reconnaissance aircraft. This is about having the right number of fighter forces to defend this country. It's not just about China. We need the right aircraft, F-35s, I get it, F-22s, eventually the NGAD to go against China. But we also have requirements in the Middle East and in deterrence requirements in Europe. When you cut 397 aircraft net, that has an impact. We're cutting 2.5 aircraft for every aircraft we bring back in to the Air Force. That is unacceptable. And if this budget doesn't allow for doing better, then we need to re-examine the Air Force budget. Perhaps they need more money to acquire 10 more F-35s a year, which we have the capacity to do. Maybe we have more capacity for more F-15s that we're producing. But I'm just saying what we're doing to the Air Force right now, particularly the Air National Guard, is unacceptable. I yield.
With that, I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Any further discussion? Gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Norcross.
Thank you, Chairman. Having looked at this over the course of the last 9 years, there is always the view from DOD that they have to look at their force structure moving forward. I look at this, and we tried to work through some language, and we didn't get there. But quite frankly, this slows down our ability to modernize the effort. The first iteration of this is going to go on for multi-years, prohibiting retirements. We've seen that. And certainly the Air National Guard is not being unfairly reduced, especially when you compare it to the active component. Over the next 5 years, the Air Force projects that the active component will lose 17% of its fighter squadrons from 52 down to 43, and the Air National Guard will lose 8% of its fighter squadrons. But we understand that this is an ongoing issue that impacts many of our colleagues and in their districts. But the fact of the matter is, by year 32, the Air Force projects no change in the ratio of fighters between active and reserves. We want them to have the ability to come back and give us a report and not tying their hands. So with due respect to those on the other side of this, I get it. But we're going to go through this in a meaningful way that the Air Force looks at its total force, not just the Air National Guard. And I urge the defeat of this amendment, and I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. Any further discussion?
Right. Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair.
Oh, gentleman, California, Mr. Carbajal.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I'm a co-sponsor of this amendment, and while I think our ranking member makes some compelling arguments, I tend to agree with Mr. Bacon, so I'll continue to be supportive of this amendment and appreciate the arguments that Mr. Bacon made in the onset. Mr. Chair, I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. Chair now recognizes the gentleman, Mr. Fallon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We need life-saving upgrades for our Humvees. There have been over 900. Yep.
We're still on the Bacon amendment. We need to finish considering.
Oh, your amendment. Oh.
You can speak in favor.
I feel I want to speak in favor of this great amendment Mr. Bacon has. I yield back.
All right. Wrong amendment. Any further discussion on the Bacon amendment? Seeing none, is there, so many in favor of the Bacon Amendment will say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Opinion of the chair, the ayes have it.